Cool.
What about the pina colada?
I have a vegetable garden. I can go out there.
Yeah.
As of this weekend, I have a vegetable garden.
Okay. All
Oh
right.
my
we
goodness.
are all set and live on YouTube, so we can start our end of the meeting.
All right. And I'm so impressed. I've got my agenda up on my other computer.
Yeah.
So pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 18, and the Governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place, this meeting of the Medfield Board of Selectmen is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. All votes subject to remote participation and therefore are subject to remote participation and therefore will be roll call votes. And we'll just have a moment of appreciation for all of our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country, and especially thoughts for those that we were remembering on Memorial Day who gave their lives for this country. Thank you. So I see our first appointment is with Sarah Raposa to discuss the Community Development Block Grant application. Sarah?
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. So by way of background, the Community Development Block Grant Program is a housing and urban development program, which grants funding to entitlement communities, specifically for neighborhood revitalization and economic development programs for particularly for communities with higher, low to moderate income levels. It was recently announced that non-entitlement communities in Medfield would be eligible for an approximately $20 million pot of funding for COVID-related impacts. So Medfield has the opportunity to submit a regional application with the towns of Walpole, Foxborough, Rentham, and Bellingham as the lead community to request funding for public social services grants and micro enterprise grants. So Bellingham is already a CDBG entitlement community, so it's easiest for us to tag along with their contract with Community Opportunities Group. And also I've been advised because of the onerous reporting requirements that it's not recommended to apply individually. So we must demonstrate the need in Medfield to include in the application. So I've contacted the Council on Aging, Medfield Youth Outreach, Medfield Food Cupboard, and the Medfield Foundation for data that can be incorporated into the application. So we're seeking data related to COVID on the organization's services. For example, year-to-date comparisons of services provided between April 2019 and April 2020, number of clients served, new users, funding allocated, number of meals provided, anything to show increase in demand or impact to normal services. The information received from the Council on Aging documented the number of duplicated and unduplicated interactions for food delivery, food shopping assistance, friendly calls, distance visiting, support group, mask delivery, phone pal, wellness checks, among other services. Medfield Youth Outreach provided data on the Angel Run Fund, as well as the COVID-19 Public Need Fund that was established by the Medfield Foundation. And Abby Marble and I have been in contact to finalize the Medfield Foundation data, as well as include information about the Medfield Food Cupboard. And as far as micro enterprises are concerned, the town does not actually track this type of data. So postcards were sent to all 303 entities on the town clerk's list of business licenses, asking for those who qualify as a micro enterprise to reply to a short survey using Google Forms so that we can summarize the local need for that sector. And micro enterprises are defined as businesses with 5 employees or less, and one of the employees includes the owner. So far, I've received 29 responses. A lot of the responses are sole proprietors working from home, but many of the responses indicate that due to COVID, they have experienced lost clients, a range between 25 to 80% reduction in business, potential loss of rental space, and then some risk complete closure. So this survey will be open for a few more days, maybe Friday, maybe Monday, maybe Tuesday, but we'll have to close it soon. And I want to acknowledge that Medfield has a lower need score, generally speaking, but it's well recognized that everyone has been affected by the virus shutdown, and their chances of receiving at least some funding is very likely, which is why non-entitlement communities are invited to apply. Since the CDBG notice came about very quickly and the application deadline is happening very quickly, we will work on the disbursement methods as a next step, looking to our consultants at Community Opportunities Group for lawful and fair programmatic advice. There is no cost to apply, and the grant funding pays for the administrative costs of COGS work. While I'm sure we won't be able to demonstrate the need to qualify for the maximum amount, I do think that we'll be able to bring some of this funding to Medfield. The applications are due on Friday, June 5th, and a public hearing is being held in Bellingham on June 2nd. And I will provide you with a draft letter of support for your meeting on June 2nd for inclusion with the application.
Thanks, Sarah. Any questions for Sarah? Gus?
I don't have any. I think we talked about this in the last meeting and it sounded like a worthwhile thing to go after and see what we can bring in. So thanks for doing the work, Sarah.
You're welcome.
Sarah,
Nothing for me either.
Sarah, my question would be, I'm one of the micro enterprises you're talking about. And so do you want more people? I mean, I'm not licensed in any way by the town, so you don't know about me, so you didn't reach out to me. But do you want people to?
I don't think vegetable gardens count, Pete.
I do have a sideline of practicing law.
No, of course, you can certainly submit the poll for sure. And then you have the information because you posted it. So you have the link to the Google.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. It's also on the town's website.
Very good. Thanks
Yeah,
for following up on this for us, Sarah.
My pleasure. Okay, I'll give you the letter for next week's meeting to probably authorize Pete to sign or even the town administrator because the turnaround is very quick. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next appointment is with Maurice Goulet, Director of the DPW, who requests the Board of Selectmen to sign a contract with VHB for paving inspection.
So Mo actually couldn't be here tonight, so I'm representing him. And this is actually his annual request for VHB to do the pavement testing. This is something I think he's had since he started here. I think this is actually our 3rd year of bringing VHB on to do all of our pavement testing to ensure that what we're putting down is here for the long haul.
Questions from Gus or Mike?
I had just a minor one. There was a clause somewhere in there that talked about the rates being reviewed annually, but this is only like a 8-month contract.
Yeah,
is it
just
only a 3-year? Is it always annual or is it?
He usually puts it in place during the paving season, but it's
Okay.
our timeline.
Okay, so the clause didn't have
No.
any operational significance. Okay.
Nope. And just a note, he did want me to let you know that this is reimbursable and can be paid for with Chapter 90. So we'll be seeking that once they finish the project as well.
Mike, anything?
No, I would move that we approve the contract.
Is there a second?
Second?
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Thank you.
Let's see, our next appointment is with Christine Truweiler, requests Board of Selectmen to authorize the town administrator to sign annual insurance renewal for the Medfield State Hospital policy, which looks like it's around $18,000 a year.
Correct. It's, we've had, this will be our third year carrying the policy. It's gone up, actually went down a few $100s last year, and this year we're up $300. But this is our annual insurance liability policy that we do for the buildings. We have to keep it in place if we're going to allow people to go into the buildings, which we've been doing on a regular basis.
Questions?
No question.
None for me. So I would move that we approve the insurance policy for Medfield State Hospital.
Second.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Here.
And our next appointment then is to, with Christine again, request Board of Selectmen to sign a contract with McKechnie Associates, Inc. for landscaping services at the Medfield State Hospital. We're changing our provider from Shady Tree to McKechnie.
Yes, we actually had, we had 4 people, 4 firms respond. We just had finished a 2-year contract with Shady Tree. It was put out to bid, and Paul McKechnie was our low bidder at $61,400.
And for people in town, the cost to mow the grass at the hospital is $3,400 a mow.
Correct.
Any questions from my fellow selectmen?
No questions.
No questions. So I would move that we approve the contract with McKechnie for mowing at the State Hospital.
Second.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Our next appointment is with Christine Terweiler again, who's
Just dominating our agenda
I'm
tonight.
dominating the agenda.
who's requesting us to, the board to sign a memorandum of MOA, a memorandum of agreement for health insurance, is it, or?
So let me just give you a little context on this. I actually have 6 of them for you to sign. Last fall, we started working with the Health Insurance Advisory Committee, asking them to take a look at our plan design to see if there was anything they could do in terms of a cost savings. I can't tell you how hard they worked. They did an incredible job. They were able to come up with some plan design changes. Unfortunately, those plan design changes came to us about less than a week before COVID hit. So at that time, there was no chance we could negotiate with each union to get those plan design changes in place. And as I remember back in March, I signed a renewal with Blue Cross Blue Shield with an increase of 3.48%. Flash forward 2 weeks ago, the IAC came to me and said they really, really wanted to see if they could make it work. And I did not believe in 2 weeks they could get 6 unions to agree to an MOA and get Leo to produce the MOA and get all of that done in 2 weeks. And I am pleased to pronounce they did it in less than 2 weeks. We had everything on Friday, and it will be a cost savings for the employees up to $600 a year.
Wow, impressive. Thank you.
Great.
And for those following along at home, IAC is Insurance Advisory Committee.
So they did an incredible amount of work, and the credit is due to them, as well as Kathy Vandenboom, who did an incredible amount of work getting all of this to happen in about 12 days. So they really should be applauded for their work, and I will send them a letter thanking them for all of their input. So I need to authorize, each of you have to sign the 6 MOAs and then authorize me to sign the new health insurance rates with Blue Cross Blue Shield.
And you want to vote to do this, I'm assuming too.
Yes, please.
Any questions, or do we have a motion?
Are we going to have to come and sign these in person?
My next request was going to be if I could use your stamp signatures on all of these, because I actually need to get them to Blue Cross Blue Shield tomorrow so that we can put this in place for July 1st.
Absolutely, then.
Well, then I would move that we authorize Ms. Truweiler to use our stamp signatures, which I wasn't even aware we necessarily had, to wonder what else you've been signing with them.
It's all part of the coup.
The COVID coup.
To sign our stamp signatures and approve the 6 MOAs for the revisions to the health insurance as described.
Second.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
And then continuing with the town administrator's dominance of the meeting, she's requesting the Board of Selectmen to authorize herself to sign the new health insurance rate proposal.
And that will just replace the rate proposal that we did in March.
Questions or motion?
No
I would
question.
move that we authorize the town administrator to sign the new rate proposal.
Second.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Chris, is there anything that you want to do? We've got 15 minutes before the warrant committee starts, apparently.
We do. I actually want to talk to you about something that falls. Actually, before I start, I should recognize that Representative Denise Garlick is at your meeting. If you wanted to have her give you an update before I speak, I can go after the warrant committee.
That would be perfect. Denise, could you let us know what's going on? You need to unmute yourself, Denise. Alt-A to unmute yourself.
And I will say that it's always great to have Representative Garlick here, but of late, I think her update should have some ominous music at the beginning of them. There ought to be some intro of.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yes, we can.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure always. So I just wanted to share with you that the House of Representatives voted today to engross Senate 2680, which is the bill we have been waiting for related to municipalities and town meeting. And so Christine has the full document, but as far as our town meetings, for select boards is section 7. Select boards of towns that do not have a representative town meeting form of government may vote with the town moderator's approval to lower the number of voters needed for a quorum at town meeting that can take place from now until 30 days after the emergency ends. That number for the quorum cannot be less than 10%. So anything from 10% up is fine. The board must provide adequate notice and adequate means of public access to its deliberations. And town meetings that use the lower quorum threshold may only conduct business related to town budget or to meet a federal deadline. So my understanding is that, you know, once the House engrosses, then we need the Senate to concur. The discussions about this have been very positive with the Senate. It's never over till it's over, but this is the step we were waiting for.
Great.
Thank you.
Is there anything further on the what we might expect for state monies next year and as we try to do our
So
budgeting?
not so far as the budget, but I did want
Okay.
to talk to you about the IT bond bill, but I want to make sure that I put it in appropriate context because every dollar matters now, and I don't want to give you a sense that I have dollars for you that are not in my hands. But in a bond bill, it has to be 2 steps. You have to have money authorized, and then the second step is appropriation. The appropriation is when the town actually gets the money. You can never have the money appropriated if it's not authorized. In the IT bond bill, we had 2 elements for the town of Medfield. One was for $15,000 to help with the processing into an electronic payroll system. And one was for $90,000 to update the capacity of the IT service. Both of those are in the IT bond bill. So I'm very hopeful about that. I think it's important work. I, as you can imagine, worked hard to ensure that Medfield could be in that bond bill, but we're only at step 1. Okay.
And just to let you know, those 2 projects were chosen because they were in our capital improvement plan.
Good choice then. Anything else that you wanted to share with us tonight, Denise, or?
No, but I could use a little happy music now, Mike. Yeah.
You should end on that high note. That should be
That's
where you
right.
should say.
That's right.
Very sorry to be joining late, but Denise, I'm sure, did you report on the status of the legislation regarding the quorum and the agenda for the town meeting? What was, where are we on that?
So the House engrossed today, Scott, House engrossed S 2680, and it's in section 7 for us.
Yep.
Relating to Medfield, and it says that in section 7, it refers to us as select boards that don't have a representative town meeting. And it said that we need the town moderator's approval. We can lower the number of voters needed for a quorum from now until 30 days after the emergency ends. That number cannot be less than 10%.
Yep.
Board must also provide notice and adequate means of public access to its deliberations. And town meetings using the lower quorum may only conduct business related to the town budget or to meet a federal deadline.
And I read that language. Christine had forwarded that to me. So that tells us where the House is in looking at that. So are we able to be, have you talked about whether we can rely on the likelihood of that passage, or what we should be thinking about in terms of?
Right. So what has to happen now is we need the Senate to concur with us. So I was in touch with the Chair of Ways and Means this afternoon around 6 o'clock tonight so that I could report to you. He said those discussions have been very positive, but we'll all be more comfortable when it's done, Scott.
Okay.
Okay.
And I'm sure Christine and I know you guys have been talking about what the dimension of that means for a town that has a quorum of 250 people, and it raises all of the considerations that we've been talking to the Board of Health about and other things. So, I would just like to present my own personal support for both the idea of being able to reduce the quorum and also the idea of being able to kind of narrow the agenda for the town meeting to things that really need to be considered here before we get to the end of the month of June, and then we go forward from there. Same, I'm sure that's very consistent with what you're hearing and what Christine has been advocating for.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
Mark.
Mr. Sorrell.
Rep. Garlick, this actually originated in the Senate and passed there in the first place, didn't it?
So what had happened, Mark, just to share with you, is a bill originated in the Senate, but it didn't originate in the joint committee process. So in fact, there was language, but it was really hard to figure out how to move that bill. So then the Senate put it through Senate Ways and Means. A lot of this language is consistent. Of course, not all of it is exactly the same. So it's not a mirror bill. So that's why we still need concurrence of the Senate.
My only point was the sense was that there's a good prospect for it passing in the Senate since it originated there in the first place.
Yeah, and that was the Chair of Ways and Means impression as well. They were discussing it while it was in process. They've been in touch with the staff, but I'm careful never to make a promise I can't deliver on. So until it's signed, sealed, and delivered, which I expect to be very soon, we are where we wanted to be by tonight.
So the critical situation here, assume that passes, assume that we reduce the quorum, there's then the language in there that restricts the town meeting consideration, no matter what else, to just budget items and federal deadlines. So that's going to, if all that happened, we'd have to review the warrant in terms of what we'd be able to go forward on at the meeting, no matter what ends up in the warrant tonight.
That would be my understanding, Mark. Lots of people are nodding heads here.
Hmm.
Yes.
So is that everything then, Representative Garlick?
So far, steady.
All right. Thank you so much for your services for our town. We appreciate it. We appreciate your coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Denise.
Thank you.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes, sir. Mr. Sorrell.
Is Rep. Garlick still there?
She is.
I had heard that there was a bill floating around providing flexibility for restaurants, operations, with respect to alcohol service and licensure and that sort of thing, to allow them to expand on a temporary basis? Are you aware of anything like that up there?
So I do know that there is a real focus on the business community, small businesses and other businesses, and particularly with reference to restaurants. I don't know about the progress of that particular bill, Mark, but I know that lots of people are trying to figure that out.
Thank you.
Certainly, of course.
Chris, where do you want to head next on our agenda? It's
Well,
got 5 minutes before the warrant committee.
let me start to talk about something I'd like to do that actually Needham just put into place for the Memorial Day weekend. I have been working with the Board of Health for the last month or so, trying to figure out the best way to help our downtown businesses. And we've been able to do a few things in terms of restaurants, allowing them to sell market items, et cetera. But we started thinking about, we wanted them to be able to serve outside. And this kind of dovetails into what Mark was talking about, is that we thought about giving them access to our public open space so that they could start serving outside. It was clear once the guidance came from the governor that that was not going to be an option until much later in the phased reopening of the state. And then there was a delay with the ABCC in allowing restaurants to be able to serve alcohol outside of their normal footprint of their restaurant and or outdoor seating. So what I'm proposing is that we use the Economic Development Fund to buy a series of picnic tables. And we set those picnic tables up around downtown so that people can come eat at the restaurants, do their takeout, and that they be allowed to purchase alcohol, beer and wine only from the restaurants, and eat that within the designated picnic table areas. I think it's great for our restaurants to be able to do that, to get more people downtown, but I also think it will keep people in the downtown instead of taking their food and going home. And they will start to go to some of our retail shops that are open for curbside delivery as well. So you can think about it while we do the warrant hearing and then talk about how you feel about that.
I had seen this in the Newton Needham Chamber of Commerce wrote about this, and I had sent that along to Chris as saying that I thought it was a good idea. And in my mind, I thought that maybe Straw Hat Park, the park by the gazebo, and Baxter Park, maybe the park by Baxter Pond, Meeting House Pond, and maybe even if Needham Bank, they have a big lawn that on Park Street that maybe could be used as well if they were willing.
I had actually handed this concept of this off to Sarah a couple weeks ago, and she's come up with a list and a map of where we can lay out, and those include some of those spots as well. And in addition to the picnic tables, we would be putting out trash and recycling receptacles in the same area.
Excellent idea.
And my only question, Christine, before we go to the warrant hearing is whether the limitation to just beer and wine is going to have a negative impact on any of the businesses and whether we could be flexible on that as well.
We can't be flexible on that until the governor allows them to sell cocktails on a to-go basis. I was on a call with the MMA earlier today, and that is still pending, but has not been approved yet. I would advise once we allow that, once that's allowed, we allow them to do that as well. But currently they're only allowed beer and wine.
Okay. Well, there you go.
And before we get to the warrant committee, I'll play the role of curmudgeon on the Board of Selectmen for this discussion, just to think about it. I actually have some trouble with putting picnic tables throughout the downtown area and then opening it up to the consumption of alcoholic beverages on two counts. Mark, you can weigh in on one of them, but one of them has to do with using public property for the consumption of alcoholic beverages. And the question is, what liabilities, if any, does that introduce to the town? That's a legal question. The second is our downtown is used by a lot of our kids, and having the idea of having people just interspersed throughout the downtown, even with just beer and wine, it seems like it's the wrong thing to do in a downtown that's so heavily populated by kids that are just out on their own. So not a firm position yet, but I do want to put that out there.
Okay, thanks, Gus. And with that, are we ready to start the warrant hearing?
Yes, just give me one moment to promote the warrant committee.
To manage the systems.
Yes. Let's see.
So because of the COVID crisis, I actually have a subscription to Zoom now. And I discovered that I was doing my second Zoom meeting and I couldn't get anybody on because in very small print at the bottom of the dialog box, it said I had to log in first.
It's giving me a little trouble tonight.
I think we need to get our town council a camera.
We're working on that. We're doing a Zoom informational session with Mark on Thursday. There we go.
Greetings, friends and colleagues. How's everyone doing?
Very good, Mike. Christine has made you miraculously all appear. So welcome. And I guess it, and I think it's your
only
meeting.
miraculously give me a meeting at 7 o'clock, then we'd really be in business right now.
I guess that's beyond the capacities of the system at the moment. So, but it is your meeting now, so please take over.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Christine, do I have to do the preamble?
No, you just need to call it to order. Pete's already read that, so you're covered under that as well.
Fantastic. Well, looks like we have a quorum of the warrant committee, so I'm going to call the public hearing to order. Thank you to the Board of Selectmen for inviting us tonight, and see Scott McDermott, Mr. Moderator. Hello, good to see you. As I understand, the Board of Selectmen has been informed. We did not have a pre-meeting at 7 o'clock, so Gus is going to hear some of his favorite words a lot tonight, which is warrant committee to be heard. So apologies for that, but we will move forward nonetheless. I am going to go ahead and read all of the articles in the interest of time and efficiency. And I will read the warrant committee's recommendation to the extent we have one. But if there are any questions or discussion, we'll kick it off to the warrant committee member that had that particular article. Is that all right with everyone? Okay, let's get started then. Article 1, to see if the town will vote to accept the following named sums as perpetual trust funds for the care of lots in Vine Lake Cemetery. The interest thereof as may be necessary for said care is. And then the chart as printed in the warrant. Or do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee will be heard on this one. We didn't have the chart in enough time to vote on that. Article 2, to see if the town will vote to set expenditure limits for 53E.5 revolving funds established under the Code of Town of Medfield, Chapter 117, Departmental Revolving Funds for fiscal year 2021 as follows, with the chart as printed in the warrant, or do or act anything in relation thereto. Again, warrant committee to be heard. We didn't have the numbers at the time. Article 3, to see if the town will vote to appropriate some money from the Public Educational and Government Access and Cable Related Fund to Medfield TV for the purpose of providing local cable access services, equipment and programming for the town of Medfield, or take any other action related thereto. The warrant committee recommends approval. Article 4, to see if the town will vote to fix the salary and compensation of the following elected officers: moderator, town clerk, selectmen, assessors, school committee, trustees of the public library, parks and recreation commissioners, planning board, housing authority, and trust fund commissioners, or do or act anything in relation thereto, with the chart as printed in the warrant. The warrant committee recommends passage. Article 5, to see if the town will vote to amend the personnel administration plan and classification of positions and pay schedule effective July 1st, 2019, as said on the warrant, or do or act anything in relation thereto. My understanding is that this is not set yet, and so the warrant committee will be heard. Article 6, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate and or transfer from available funds sums of money requested by the selectmen or any other town officer, board, commission, or committee to defray operating expenses of the town for the fiscal year commencing July 1st, 2020, or such other sums as the town may determine as required by Mass General Law 41, Section 108, or do or act anything in relation thereto. Obviously, the warrant committee to be heard. I don't know if we want to have discussion on the operating budget at this point, or do that later or at a later date. It's up to the selectmen. Gus, Mike, Pete.
I'm okay in either direction. I'm not sure. I was actually figuring the warrant committee would let us know when you were ready to talk about a budget that you felt was a good one. So.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah, I think on that point, we just continue to encourage the town administration and the school department to continue to work together to get us something that we can be proud of and vote for and recommend to the town at annual town meeting. I don't think, Christine and her team, I think everyone on the warrant committee would agree with me, is doing a fantastic job in difficult times. And so we'll hope that continues and hope to have more to discuss as we get closer to annual town meeting.
The one comment I'd make as an individual selectman, because Pete and Mike and I haven't talked much about this, but given if in fact we have our town meeting in June, and given I'm assuming it'll be a town meeting with a reduced quorum, I think we only want to do that if between now and then we can get to a budget that everybody's okay with. This should not be a controversial discussion. If we're doing this in June, this should be something that fundamentally, as painful as it may be, we have everybody on board with, that not turn into some sort of a disputed discussion with only 25 people required for a quorum. So,
yeah. Mike, Pete, anything before we move on?
I'm ready to have you move on. I think that I agree with Gus about the things that he said. Hopefully we'll get some numbers that we all agree upon.
Same for me, Mike.
All right. Mike, that was really dramatic how you leaned in real close to the camera there. I thought you were going to drop some legal brilliance on us.
I've been working with the Zoom director on Zoom body language and all of that. So I'm glad you noticed that. Sort of like a home stager. They'll tell you how to.
I always pay attention to little things.
Increase your impact in the Zoom. That's why I've got the blank white wall back there. So you're not distracted by any fine home furnishings in the back.
Article 7, to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate from the FY 2021 tax levy and or transfer from available funds and or borrow for capital expenditures, including the following, with capital budget as printed in the warrant, and the warrant committee to be heard. Article 8, to see if the town will vote to appropriate money and transfer said sum from the municipal buildings capital stabilization fund created under Article 43 of the 2018 annual town meeting for the purposes and amounts below as printed in the warrant. The warrant committee had actually initially voted in favor of the municipal building stabilization article, but given what's happened since then, we've had a couple of questions on that. We've been working with Christine and Nick to get to the bottom of, so we are going to be heard on that as well. Article 9, to see if the town will authorize under GL Chapter 44, Section 21C, upon the recommendation of the Board of Selectmen, following lease purchase financing agreements for the acquisition of equipment that may be acquired through the issuance of debt under GL 44, or improvement of a capital asset, the improvement of which might be financed by the issuance of debt under GL 44. The term of the agreement not to exceed the useful life of the equipment or improvement as determined by the Board of Selectmen, and to authorize the department specified below to enter into such agreements on behalf of the town, and to approve appropriation for the first year payments of the agreements as stated below, or to take any other action relative thereto, with the chart as printed in the warrant. The warrant need to be heard. Article 10, to see if the town will vote to raise, appropriate, or transfer from available funds the sum of $4,565,256 for the Water Enterprise Fund and the Sewer Enterprise Fund as follows, or acted as any manner thereto, as printed in the warrant. I understand because we're undecided at this point on cost of living that this one is not ready to be voted on yet, so warrant committee to be heard. Article 11, to see if the town will vote to transfer $1,022 in funds received from the Mass Department of Transportation for the town's share of the fee charged for Uber, Lyft, or other ride-sharing services originating in the said funds used for road and or sidewalk improvements, or to act anything in relation thereto. Warrant committee recommends passage. Article 12, to see if the town will vote to appropriate $15,000 and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of making improvements to the economic vitality of the town, or to do or act anything in relation thereto. A fractured warrant committee recommends passage. We will have a minority report authored by myself on this one. Article
No picnic tables for you, Mike.
Well, apparently I won't be able to drink in them if Gus gets his way, so you can have your picnic table. Article 13, to see if the town will vote to transfer some money from sewer betterments paid in advance to the sewer stabilization fund, or do anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage. Article 14, to see what sum of money the town will vote to raise and appropriate, transfer from available funds, or otherwise provide to implement any collective bargaining agreements between the town of Medfield and Medfield Police Union from July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020, or otherwise act thereon. My understanding is that we're close on this one, but the meeting with the union has been postponed till this Thursday, so the warrant committee will be heard on this one as well. Article 15, to see if the town will vote to amend the code of the town of Medfield, Chapter 10, boards, commissions, committees, and councils by adding section 10.8 that states, a Medfield public body may consider, underline, holding a public hearing or public forum prior to voting on any underline non-routine action or decision if at least 10 residents request it, and if public hearing is not already required by law, or take any other action in relation thereto. Now, the warrant committee initially voted on this voted to dismiss. That was before the wording has been changed, so we are going to have to do a revote, and will be heard. I can say for my part, my vote's not changing. I have a lot of issues with this, with the wording of this petition. Particularly, we have undefined terms like non-routine action that to me puts too much onus on volunteer committees to figure out exactly what this means, and the process for and residents requesting it. It doesn't say in the petition, whether or not that's in person, in writing, in email. And what the particulars of the public hearing or public forum are going to be, who's going to run that. I just think there's more questions than answers on this. I understand that It's in here to help encourage and foster community participation, but I think as written, it doesn't actually do that, and it just causes more headaches for volunteer committees. Another thing that I think this does do is by saying public body, I think this affects committees and boards that were not intended to by the author and those that signed on to it. Like, for example, under the Attorney General guidance, CPAC board would be affected by this, and I don't know that was the intention of the drafter. And also, Medfield TV is arguably covered by this. I think it needs a lot of smoothing before it's ready for a vote, and I don't think it's there yet. But again, the warrant committee will have to re-vote on that because we haven't had a chance to discuss.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Terrell, how are you doing?
Good. How are you, Mike?
Good, thanks.
So this is one article that, depending what happens with the legislation at the State House on the authority to reduce the quorum for town meeting, and if the town in fact reduced the quorum and was then limited strictly to budgetary items, this article would not be able to be taken up.
Okay.
Could I push that point just a bit further? And this is a question, I guess, for Mike and Pete. I think we discussed or entertained the idea of scheduling this town meeting at the end of June on the assumption that it would be, in fact, a reduced quorum meeting, that we weren't going to try to run an outdoor town meeting that would require 250 people to show up on the football field. So the question I'm asking, recognizing we are not yet authorized to reduce the quorum, I think that would still be where we might be at. In other words, what I'm saying is if we don't reduce the quorum, we won't have an early town meeting. If we do reduce the quorum, this article goes away. Either way, this article doesn't get entertained in June. And I'm checking with Mike and Pete to see if my interpretation tracks with their intent.
So Gus, it does for me. I mean, I think if this legislation did not pass, I would still be in favor of trying to go ahead with a town meeting under the current quorum with a limited warrant, as preferable to just shifting into the mode of a flat budget that we would adopt 1/12 every month for the next indiscriminate period of time. If the legislation passes, then I think we'd still go ahead with this truncated town meeting or limited town meeting as authorized by the legislature.
So from your standpoint, I was making the case as a practical matter, there's no way this article could be there. You're saying, yeah, it could. We might still, as far as you go, you'd still entertain a June town meeting requiring a 250 person quorum.
Yes, assuming we can logistically figure out how it would work. And that's driven by a couple of things, one of which is my skepticism about the likelihood of actually being able to do a town meeting in the fall. I think our window may be better outside in June than it is in the fall. And so I would not want to go a full year without any town meeting approval for a budget. So, yeah.
So I guess my sense, Gus, is that we might want to reduce the quorum just because we may not be certain how many people we can attract to a town meeting in June. So that might be my thought.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pete. The only difference between Mike and me is if the legislation were not to pass and we didn't have the option of reducing the quorum, if it passes, I think we're in agreement. We'd reduce the quorum. This article goes away because it doesn't qualify. If the legislation does not pass and we are stuck with our original quorum, my view was then we just don't try to do this in the end of June and also try to raise a full quorum on a Saturday on the last weekend of June. I think we're setting ourselves up for a meeting that we can't muster a quorum, but I respect what Mike is saying. All other things being equal, I'd rather get this business taken care of sooner rather than later too. So the only issue is if the legislation doesn't pass, I was suggesting we would just decide to defer to the fall. Mike said, no, I think we go for the 250. I'm not trying to force an issue. I thought we had uniformity and we don't. So that's why I asked the question.
Mike, if I could just interject on the substance of that article for a moment. I did work with the proponents with the input from the Attorney General's office, because as it was initially submitted, it would not have passed with the Attorney General's office. So at the present time, it is worded in a way that is really, I understand the language is not tight, but on the other hand, it's not mandatory either. It's all voluntary with the public body, whether they want to hold that hearing or not.
Yeah, no, I understand that, Mark. I mean, honestly, that doesn't make it much better from where I sit, and it actually might make it worse, because there's so much wiggle room in here. I don't see this as doing anything more than causing confusion and delay to most committees' businesses. Again, I don't understand what a non-routine action is for. I mean, just taking my committee, is anything that's not voting on a warrant article a non-routine action? Or are there certain warrant articles that would be a non-routine action? What about budgets? There's just too much. And I also don't understand, if it is just permissive, then I don't understand the point of even considering it.
Because if it were mandatory, the Attorney General would not allow it at all. And
No, I understand that,
right.
but
And
you're going the
advise-
other way than I'm
advise
going.
the
I'm saying that
proponents-
why are we even having it on the ballot if it's just, okay, so
They wanted to
we may
proceed.
consider, I mean, as chair of the warrant committee, I may consider a lot of things, and I do. And they're not all on the warrant for voting at a meeting.
I don't want to speak for the proponents, but they view it as aspirational, so it is what it is.
So I'm ready to move on to Article 16 if everyone else is. Article 16, to see if the town will vote to appropriate a sum of money and determine in what manner said sum shall be raised for the purpose of hiring consultants, engineers, and/or attorneys to assist the town with the development and review of the request for qualifications, request for proposals for the Medfield State Hospital and surrounding areas, to advise the town on matters concerning the site's disposition, reuse, or environmental remediation, said funds to be expended under the direction of the Board of Selectmen, with the understanding that the Board of Selectmen may authorize any other town, board, commission, committee, or department to expend a portion of said funds for such purposes, or to do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee recommends passage. Then Article 17 is the free cash article, to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Assessors to use a sum of money from free cash in the treasury for the reduction of the tax rate for fiscal year 2021, or to do or act anything in relation thereto. The warrant committee will be heard. And that brings us to the end.
Mike, I'm sorry, did you vote on Article 16?
We did,
Okay,
recommends passage.
okay, I'm sorry, I missed that. Just making sure. Thank you.
No problem. So how's everyone else doing? Good. Christine, what's next?
That's it. You can close your warrant hearing.
Okay,
Obviously, you're going to continue to work towards on the to be heards. So while we'd be going out to print within the next 48 hours on this, we're clearly not ready. So any actions that you take on Monday will get included in whatever we go to print with.
okay. Okay, I'll talk with the committee, but we might have to meet before then. Or not have to, but it might make sense to, rather than leave it to the 11th hour.
I think
You want us to wait till Monday? Okay.
no.
Monday.
Nick actually posted you for a meeting for Thursday night in anticipation that you would want to meet early. So
That's what I was thinking Thursday, actually. That's perfect. While I have my committee here, at Thursday not work for anybody? I'm not seeing anyone say yes, so, okay. Well, I'll send an email around, but let's plan on Thursday. Thank you, Nick. All All right, do I have to like officially,
You need to officially adjourn your meeting and a roll call vote to adjourn.
okay, warrant committee, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Ed Vizella,
Aye.
Joanna Hilbert,
Aye.
Christine Barden,
Aye.
Sharon Tatro,
Aye.
Newton Thompson,
Aye.
Bob Sliney,
Aye.
Jeremy Marchette,
Aye.
Mike Pastore, aye. The warrant hearing is now officially closed. Thank you for the time, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Anything for me before I hit the red button? Too late.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Hold on, Bob, I'll move you over. Okay.
Christine has effectively disappeared the warrant committee.
Oh,
So where do we head now, Chris?
If you could go back and discuss the potential for doing the outdoor seating in the open space.
Okay. Gus, you were the one that had some issues with that.
I'm the one who threw the monkey wrench in. I mean, obviously, I'm very supportive. This was a new idea, so I haven't had a lot of time to mull it over, and I'm not staking out a position, but I do want to raise some concerns. And obviously, anything we can do to help support our businesses, I'm predisposed to want to do that. So let me start with the straightforward one, seeing as Mark is still here. Mark, are there any liability issues that the town needs to be aware of and concerned, or at least think about, with regard to handing over public town property for activities involved the use of consumption of alcoholic beverages?
My understanding is we're just going to place or allow the placement of these picnic tables, and then the use of them is going to be between the restaurants and their patrons.
Yeah, but the problem is, so we put a couple of picnic tables on Baxter Park, and somebody from Avenue wanders down the street because they don't want to leave the downtown. It's not an issue of just, certain surrounding land. Well, maybe it is, but if it's not just surrounding land close to the restaurant, then somebody can pick something up at any restaurant, wander to some other part of the town, find a picnic table, sit down, start eating and drinking.
It's an enforcement issue. If somebody were hypothetically just gone to the package store and had a bottle and something like that and sat down somewhere and was consuming it, then it becomes an enforcement issue as opposed to something that has been worked out in advance.
So what I'm proposing is that your beer and wine will be purchased as part of your meal. They can't sell it to you from the restaurant unless you buy it as part of your meal. You're supposed to have an entree with it. So that was my intent, so that you wouldn't buy your food at one place and then go to the package store. You'd be doing it all at one restaurant.
Well, but how does that get policed though? If I go to Palumbo's, buy a 6-pack of beer, walk to Subway, get myself a sandwich, walk across the street to Baxter Park, open up the sandwich and pop a brew, exactly who's tracking all that and enforcing it?
Well, in your hypothetical, if you got somebody sitting there with a 6-pack, they're clearly violating the law.
So we should just get
beer and wine that is sold with the meal is going to be individual servings.
Not more than 1 or 2 cans of beer from Palumbo's.
Well, it might be difficult to enforce if they sell individual cans, and I think they do.
Mm-hmm.
It may be difficult to enforce. As far as liability, I don't under the circumstances see any. Hypothetically, if somebody's publicly intoxicated, that's a whole separate issue anyway.
Okay, well, that gives me part the answer. The other piece that I paused on was recognize, if this was only, if this only happened from 5 to 8 on, weekday and weekend nights, because that's the only time people get dinner. That's one thing. If this is, I can get lunch somewhere and I can do it or I can do it 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because that's when the kitchen opens somewhere. I am a little sensitive to the fact there's a lot of kids that just, happily, they frequent the downtown area, and all of a sudden we're taking the public spaces and we're handing them over to a broader set of uses than is normally the case. Again, this caught me by surprise. I haven't had a chance to sleep on it or anything, but that in today's world, that does bother me, that we at least I don't think we should just nonchalantly assume there's no problem there, that we don't have to think about it.
I don't think it has to be all or nothing. I think you probably could structure the program in terms of hours in the day when it's.
So I'll, if I could make a couple of comments. I mean, I think I sort of start with the presumption in any of these things that the residents of the town are going to act reasonably and responsibly, and don't need to have their interactions micromanaged by the government. And that's kind of the presumption I start with on all of these social distancing regulations, and the presumption I start with on most regulations. So the burden is sort of on the government to show there's a problem before we start hypothesizing about how people might abuse whatever relaxation there is of these rules. And so I would agree with you guys. If this turns into a scene that it looks like it's spring break in Medfield, I would say we'd shut it down. I think from a practical standpoint, I think the only restaurant in the downtown that serves alcohol before 4 o'clock is Noon Hill. And they already have a porch, an outdoor seating area to begin with. Takara might as well, although I don't remember. I think they are open for lunch. I don't know if their liquor license allows them to serve alcohol for lunch. So, I mean, Nosh and Grog opens at 4, Avenue opens at 4. And so, I don't see there being a lot of people out intoxicated drinking at lunch. I think what you're going to have, in this outdoor seating areas, you're going to have the same thing you see inside the restaurants, which are families eating and drinking responsibly. And so,
let me make a softer counter argument, though. I wasn't necessarily saying we'd have rolling drunks wandering through Medfield. I was partly raising the issue around the kids in town and what the atmosphere is. But let me make a softer counter argument. Let's say this is a smashing success and everybody has a wonderful time. Everybody's delighted with it. They love to be able to go to Baxter Park and have kind of buy a dinner and have a kind of outdoor picnic. When this is over, will we keep it that way?
I mean, my presumption would be no, right? I mean, this is sort of an accommodation. This is going to be 50 years from now, or 75 years from now, when the Richard Disorder of 2095 is showing pictures of way back when in Medfield. The summer of 2020 will be the summer of people out on picnic tables eating dinner outside because we couldn't go inside. I mean, I see it as a temporary accommodation, recognizing that it's at this point reasonably clear that the science is that it's much safer to be outside than inside. We want these businesses to succeed. We want them to succeed not only as takeout operations, but also to be able to hire back some of their employees. And I agree with you, Gus. If this becomes a problem, we would just stop it. And I certainly don't want to be in a situation where we're asking our police department to also be bouncers at an outdoor bar. And we don't have enough of them to do that. And if, as I said, it becomes a problem and people aren't responsible, then I think it would end. But so my view would be no. However long this lasts, it certainly will be over by November when no one's going to want to sit outside anyway. Yeah. But whenever it gets to the point where it's safe for people to be in restaurants again, or people have accommodated themselves to the level of risk that this particular virus presents itself and are comfortable doing so, then I think we would probably, my view would be we'd stop it. And I think people would rather be inside air conditioned anyway.
See, Mike, your argument almost won me. The libertarian in me came out and said, Mike's right. We don't need government sitting there controlling what people do. And You almost had me.
It's basically a temporary relaxation of enforcement of town bylaws.
Part of the problem is restaurants aren't allowed to serve at their own picnic tables or their own outdoor seating until much later in the phased reopening. So they can't provide any outdoor seating. Noon Hill won't be allowed to have anybody sit on their outdoor patio until they officially can reopen.
Do you know what's the time frame there, Christine? Weeks?
I have to double. It's at least I think they're in the third or fourth opening. I want to say the third.
So that's weeks. It might be I'm saying that would be end of June, which would still do the businesses some good. The summer's just getting underway.
They don't have a lot. I mean, they don't have enough outdoor seating to replace the number of tables they have inside. I mean, that's part of the issue.
Yeah, that piece of it, I'm totally on board with.
Yeah.
Have you talked to Chief Garrett by any chance, Christine?
I did. Unfortunately, she couldn't be at the meeting tonight. If we go longer, she can jump on. She was in full support of it. She actually was in Newport last weekend and had restaurant in a similar setup that Newport was doing. So she was in full support, but echoed your concerns. If it gets out of control or becomes too much of an enforcement issue, she would recommend that we shut it down.
Well, that moves me in the direction of going along with it.
I guess I trust the people in Medfield to model decent behavior, and I don't think that the mixing of the kids and the people eating outside is going to be a problem. I would also be a little different than Mike. I would, if it's successful, I wouldn't mind continuing it. If people enjoy it and want to do it, I would just be happy to let it go on.
And we could decide if we want to let it go on past this, that we don't allow alcohol at our outdoor seatings, but we allow the picnic tables to be outside. So we can have more people eat outside.
Yeah, my concern isn't really so much the patrons of the restaurants and their behavior. It's that as certain areas become established as nice places on nice nights to go out and get, sit down, have something to eat and drink. I am reasonably confident we will see people show up bringing their own picnic lunches with them, complete with alcoholic beverages. I think I would probably have done that several years ago, and
it might happen because it's a nice concert series. I'm just saying, might happen.
Yeah.
I would suggest to you, Gus, that at this point, every night at Medfield State Hospital, the town is providing that atmosphere for people. I mean, it's just hugely used up there now.
Oh yeah, yeah. But I mean, we're not endorsing, brewskis as the sun goes down or something like that. I actually, the idea of getting people out enjoying the natural resources we have and the public spaces that Medfield has invested a lot of money in to acquire, I am absolutely on board with. So yeah, like as I said, I'm willing to. There's a part of me that wants to make sure that we do this to help out the businesses, and it is a nice thing to do in the summertime. I'm a little cautious about where this could be taken over time.
Do you want to mull this then? Do you need this decided tonight, Chris? Or if Gus wants to consider it, can we take it up next week?
Yeah.
It's just about a week lead time for us to get the picnic tables here.
Well, I think we're all in agreement on the picnic tables. I think the question is, I think we can order the picnic tables and then decide what people can do with them next week.
Perfect. Just to let you know, they are ADA and they are Medfield Blue. So, and they hopefully, I think we can get them here on Saturday. So
great,
great.
And you said Sarah had,
yes.
How many tables, Christine? And
you
said Sarah had a map.
Sarah, hold on. Sarah's still here. She can give you her locations. I don't have it in front of me. Hold on one second. I think we were doing 10 tables and 6 of the recycling trash combination. There you go. Sarah, if you can just list the locations that we had.
Sarah, you're muted.
We were
still
thank you.
I actually was making a map during the warrant committee hearing, so I can share my screen if you give me permission, Christine. Otherwise, I can just run down the list.
Nope, go ahead.
Might be easier. 2 in front of Town Hall, 1 at Straw Hat Park, 3 in the sidewalk area near Juice on Main, Go Fresh, Cutlet, China Sky area, one in the alcove of Royal Pizza, 2 at Baxter Park, and then 2 at Gazebo Park. That adds up to 11 and 6 receptacles that have dual trash and recycling.
Okay.
And Mo doesn't know it just yet, but he'll be placing them there as soon as they arrive. Hey,
And
he asked
also-
me to represent him at the meeting tonight. He knew it was going to cost him something.
And probably handling the trash pickup
Yes.
for the new receptacles. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I also just wanted to gauge any concerns about having these tables and this public seating in Baxter Park, which is a memorial park.
I think I need to talk to Park and Recreation about that because they manage Baxter Park. The suggestion was also made, there are a couple other locations in that area that may be willing to, we can put them in as well, so.
Okay, yeah, and the other ones can probably be spread too. They can move. Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't think it's, I wouldn't think the fact that it's a memorial park is automatic. It's something that would bring more people into enjoying that park and maybe improving the chances that they would notice the memorials that are there and think about them. That would be my reaction to it. There maybe are some other opinions out there.
I had originally talked to Kevin when I was thinking about just allowing Noon Hill to serve at Baxter Park. And there were no immediate issues other than just some coordination for maintenance and that kind of thing. So I don't anticipate an issue.
Just another thought on that. I'm thinking about the lawn mowing the agreement we have over near Meeting House Pond. We have some of our land is over there as well. That would be another location I would think might be an enjoyable place to go and eat.
I agree. We may find the ones that we wanted to put in front of China Sky. We may move those over to Meeting House.
Okay.
Yeah, or at least one of them maybe.
So what we have about $8,000 left in the Economic Development Fund. This will essentially wipe out that fund. I have reserved $2,500 for Jean Minio for the Porch Fest. But I believe that Jean is going to be requesting Porch Fest to be, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, fiscal year 21, right? We're doing it next year. So
Yes.
$15,000, we could also fund it from there, basically what I'm saying. So this will wipe out the Economic Development Fund of that.
So make sure Mike Pastore and the Warrant Committee are fully aware of that as they review our article for $15,000 in funding.
Mike will be the first one. I'll make sure he has dinner out there.
And Christine, are you also accounting for the holiday stroll as
So
well?
that does not count any money for the holiday stroll. But if we fund the 15,000 on July 1st, we would have the money then for the holiday stroll.
Gotcha.
If it's going to help Christine, tell Mike I'll buy him the beer for the.
Chris, you might try asking the company that moved out of Medfield that sells picnic tables, whether they'd be willing to donate the tables in exchange for having a little plaque on each one saying donated by.
We can try that as well. I also would seek reimbursement for this. This is an unexpended budget item that we didn't anticipate, and we're only doing it because COVID is forcing us for the restaurant. So we would also try and seek reimbursement for it as well.
Do you have any other ideas of how much we're going to be able to account for that?
We've submitted through FEMA just based on personnel costs. We're up over 70,000 now, waiting for reimbursement on that. And I'll have a better idea after next week, what we'll be putting through for the CARES Act as of today.
And what our share of that was, just over 100,000, was it, or how much was it?
So in the CARES Act, we have $1 million earmarked for the
Oh,
town.
$1 million, okay.
But you have to spend it on unexpended, you have to be reimbursed on unexpended budget amounts. So we have been lobbying our delegation that money should be allowed by towns to be used as revenue, but we haven't had any traction with that.
Yep. So do you want to vote on that tonight then, Chris?
If you can vote on it, Sarah and I will start ordering them and get them in as soon as possible. And then we'll start a PR campaign to let people know they can.
Excellent. Excellent. Can we get a motion then, Mike?
I move the authorization of the funds to purchase picnic tables for the downtown.
Second.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson,
Yes.
and Mr. Marcucci, aye.
And Chris, anything else on our agenda that you want to go on to at this point?
The only thing I just want to give you a quick update, just keep a lookout. The library is getting ready to launch curbside service. And they are hoping to launch that on Saturday. And Pam Gardner, our library director, will start sending out information to tell people how that program will work. But the librarians are very excited to start getting books out into people's hands as soon as possible.
So then nothing else on the COVID-19 operations actions or the budgets or your update at this point?
No, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the budget items we've been reviewing, or if you want to save that until next week, until we meet with the warrant committee. That's up to the selectmen.
I guess I would hope to have greater specificity as to numbers before we talk about it, but
Okay, then let's hold until next Tuesday. I'll be meeting with the warrant committee on Monday, and we can have a discussion about it right after that.
Could we maybe just big picture review the bidding here on what we're in terms of, bigger than a bread box, smaller than a barn?
So as we talked about at the warrant committee last week, the 10% reduction in the state aid and our cuts to local receipts leaves us with a little over 1.4 million in our deficit. So one of the things I've been looking at is thanking the IAC again for all of their hard work. We're going to be able to reduce our cost of our health insurance line item. I'm cautiously optimistic we can reduce it, but I'm also concerned that with people facing layoffs, they may be more apt to come onto the town's insurance. And where we spend about $17,000 for a family plan, that's our share of an employee. I want to make sure we have enough money in there to cover an increase in the number of people who come to our plan. That being said, I think we can reduce that account about $93,000. I've also been talking to the financial team about not putting our money into stabilization. We normally put $200,000 into our stabilization account, to not do that. But with the agreement that any money that comes back from the CARES Act or from FEMA be deposited in stabilization to make up for that shortfall for this year. We also talked, Gus and I had a chance to talk earlier today about not increasing our OPEB as part of the financial policy. We're recommended to increase it by 10%. My recommendation would be to not fund that this year, which results in a savings of $42,500, and then recommending a usage of free cash at $350,000. That totals up to be just around $685,000, which will reduce the overall deficit down to $780, which seems smaller, but is an incredible amount of money considering both the schools and towns have made some significant reductions to their budget already.
If I could just make a brief comment on OPEB. Obviously, I've been the OPEB Trust Fund chair for several years, and it's uncharacteristic of me to argue against funding OPEB. I really don't want to see us ever back off on our current level of commitment to OPEB. But what in my head, again, working in gross numbers here, with about a $1.4 million further reduction that we need to make in the budget, between the stabilization fund, the free cash, and the insurance. Where I was at was if there's ways that we could absorb at least half of that, not on the operating budget side. That's probably all that we can be expected to be able to do outside of the operating budgets, but at least that's half of it. And the only problem is that, as you all know, when we start using the stabilization fund and even free cash for that matter liberally, we're starting to create a long-range implication around any kind of financing for a school project that's coming down the road. And so I don't know the right answer, but what I was trying to do was find a balanced approach that got us through this period of unknowns to presumably at the fall, we will get something by way of good news that would at least partially offset the commitment of those reserves. But I'm acutely aware that we're kind of temporarily turning our back on financial policies. We're potentially jeopardizing our credit worthiness. It seems like a rather extraordinary situation to be in, and throwing more than half of that burden at the operating budgets has its own damage that it'll do.
Okay, anything more on budgets, Chris?
Nope, that's all I have right now.
Selectmen reports then? Mike,
Nothing from me, no.
Gus?
We had a development committee meeting last Wednesday night. The committee is primarily still working on coming up with the consultant that we'd like to bring on board to help put the RFQ and the RFP together. We haven't talked schedule. You might recall, originally the plan was for an RFQ to go out at the end of the summer with an identification of likely bidders who could get an RFP early in the year, next in 2021, and that presumably probably at a special town meeting, but even maybe an annual town meeting, we would be able to put a recommendation before the voters around a specific developer with a specific plan to get approval of the land disposition. We haven't had a discussion on scheduling, but I think in light of everything that's gone on, and the fact that we, at our first attempt to find a contractor, we didn't get any responses at all, that I would anticipate there'll be some kind of delay there, although I think the committee doesn't want to delay it any more than it needs to. We've been in discussions with one law firm who effectively submitted an unsolicited proposal, I guess would be the way to put it. Sarah had been looking for new possibilities for who could help us. And right now, the committee is wrestling with whether a law firm alone is what we need to get an RFQ and an RFP document pulled together. So we know that we're going to need legal help throughout this process. So it's kind of trying to figure out whether this law firm might be a good choice, and whether it's a good choice to fit the full need, or whether it's a good choice to just fit the legal needs. And then we still have to figure out how to get the support we need for the RFQ and RFP development. Is that a fair summary, Sarah? And the only other comment I have is generally speaking, as the weather gets better, I try harder to take occasional drives and check-ins at the state hospital. Pete, I think you do it, but you do it under your own foot power when you're running, I think. I would
usually walking. Okay,
well, I'm not sure you're sampling it at a different time than I am, but I would just make a general observation that the vast majority of people that I see there, including high school kids, continues to abide by the safe social distancing. A good number of them have masks on. There are occasions where you have two friends and they're inside the 6-foot circle, I'm sure, but on balance, I'm aware of some of the disruptions that are occurring in other parts of the country where I think governments have been a little more coercive and restrictive in their approach. From what I see, I think we've done this the right way, giving people the breathing room, asking them for the cooperation, and I think we've been doing a decent job of getting it, at least at the times that I'm there. I appreciate it.
Anything else, Gus?
That's it.
I would start then by just saying that if I go running, I'm there in the morning, but generally recently I've just been going up walking at sunset, and I see plenty of violation of the social distancing and plenty of people that don't have masks on. So, but you know, it is what it is. In terms of committees, the Energy Committee met and they produced the document that was forwarded to the Board of Selectmen today with the recommendation that the Dale Street new school be a net zero building, because if you don't build it for net zero now, you're going to have to probably change it in the future to make it net zero, is I think some of the thinking of the Energy Committee's initial examination of the issue seems to be that it's a very small change in the price to make it net zero, or it may even be revenue positive to make it net zero. So we're hoping that the building committee will seriously consider that and have their experts look at that. The building committee has said that they'll only do that if the Board of Selectmen tells them to do that. So
Yeah, so let me react to that quickly, Pete, just and because you're on the committee. So if you can get the information to demonstrate that the committee is right about that, that's great. The number I've heard is $3 to $5 million. And so, I mean, the building committee is going to do whatever it does, but right now, that kind of added cost on top of the other added cost, I have a very dim view of. If the energy committee has solid, economic arguments that this is in fact a small cost, then I think it'll be easy it certainly would be easy to get my support if it's small cost. I'm alarmed that it's not. So,
I guess
because you're on the committee.
The figure that I saw from the building committee, I thought was 1.7 million of extra premium if you built to higher energy standards. I may be remembering it wrong, but the other figure that I would point you to is the information that was provided by the energy committee from other schools, especially that chart that showed the additional costs below the line and the additional savings above the line, and I don't know if it was a school in Lexington, but it was a positive net cash flow for the town right from the beginning for that school.
And I think that's the kind of economic argument I'd like to see. I have looked at that information.
Yeah, I would hope that we would get from the building committee's experts the return, that if you're spending whatever it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 million, how quickly do you make that back in the operating savings?
If you look closely at that information, though, that's projected information. It's not delivered. So I mean, I'm not fighting against it if the arguments are there and if they are believable. But right now, what I saw in there was anticipated savings, projected positive returns, not demonstrated positive returns. So
from the school in Lexington, I think that's right. Yeah. So, but I think that what we want to be doing is we want to be directing the building committee to have their experts develop the facts on this. I mean, they're the ones that have the expertise on this, not the Board of Selectmen or the Energy Committee.
I would hope it's the Energy Committee or the people that the Energy Committee talks. Well, Mike, maybe you're right, Pete. I don't think we throw this on the Building Committee unless they tell us they're qualified to do it. And my concern is solely the impact it's going to have on the cost of the school.
I think that their consultants, Arrow Street or any of, I don't know all the consultants, but I think that Arrow Street was mentioned as somebody that certainly has the expertise to give us the answers.
Great.
So we need the answers
I
from
think
somebody.
we will be able to get technical answers, and I think like all projections like that, they're based on certain assumptions about what energy prices are going to be, what energy usage is going to be, and I think to kind of repeat my refrain on this, if we say we don't want to go in a net zero direction, then we're also assuming that we're never going to be forced to in the next 50 or 75 years. We're never going to be forced to retrofit our buildings to go in that direction. And so maybe we won't, right? Maybe that this will pass and that won't be a thing that people are worried about anymore. But if we think it is a thing that people are worried about, there's always a chance at some point we could be forced to look at it. A lot of it depends too on the size of the building and then other system choices that we make, and that can be adjusted over time. And so even as we're going through the process of designing the building, I think what the building committee would like from the selectmen on this issue is whether it's a sufficient priority for the town that we should try to accomplish it. And it may well be that policy judgment is going to depend on what the cost is. That if it's $500,000, we think it's worth spending the $500,000. If it's $5 million, maybe it's not. And so I think that's the guidance that at least Mike Quinlan has suggested he's looking for from the selectmen. Is this important enough to the town that we should spend some money in this project on that? I think we probably all agree that if it's effectively free, or free the way that government defines things being free, we'll probably do it. And the question is going to be, the policy judgment is going to be, if it's not free, what do we do? And I think we don't have the exact numbers of the magnitude of that. And there's also there's net zero building. There's also net zero ready building, which is sort of a midpoint. You're not going to be net zero on day one, but you've got certain adjustments you can make down the road to get to net zero if you want to get there. So I think we'll have more details on what those numbers are and as we refine the project.
What was the part about free as government defines it that you were referring to, Mike?
Well, generally it defines it as if you can come up with a projection from a semi-credible or quasi-credible person, entity, group that says, well, this is going to pay for itself over time, right? Obviously, if you think oil prices are going to be $300 a barrel in 10 years, almost any amount you spend to not have to use oil in the building is going to make it free, or you're going to save money on it because of those. If it's going to be $10 a barrel, then the cost is going to be different. And so that's all I mean is that a lot of what government says, well, this tax cut pays for itself or this spending pays for itself. Right. It doesn't really, but you've got somebody with sufficient pieces of paper and letters after the name who will say it does. And then we can say it's now paid for itself. It's now free. Just like when something's going to go up 7% and then someone wants it to go up 3%, and that's a draconian cut. That's sort of a government cut because somebody said it's 7. Now I want to make it 3. Well, you've slashed it in half. You jerk. So that's what I mean by government free.
Right. So I'll put a clear stake in the ground. That's not a rationale that I'll accept personally on this one. And the reason is that I understand you can always justify things over the life cycle of lots of things. Not everybody. I justified my solar panels on my roof. I took out a second mortgage, a home equity line of credit because I could, to put money in up front for solar panels that I've been told will pay for themselves in 7 years. And I think there's a good chance that's true. Had I not been able to take out that home equity line of credit, I wouldn't have had the money to pay for the solar panels despite that long-term justification. I am concerned in this town right now about the affordability of the taxes that we have now. And the fact that we can justify something with a 50-year or 30-year or 20-year payback is insufficient for me just because of the circumstances. And I'm taking a harder line because the cost of this school has gone where it's gone. So if we sit there and say we'd like to do this and there's no cost, there's no impact on the total cost of the school, we just think this is more important than something else that gets traded off, I'm going to be a lot more receptive to that if it can't be demonstrated to pay for itself. Mike, you brought about the net zero ready. I think there are alternatives as far as whether we're going to be forced to do it. The governor's already backed off the net zero by 2050, so we're not going to get forced to do it for 30 years. That's
assuming Charlie Baker is governor for the next 30 years.
Well, I mean,
I don't think you're going to get someone more conservative than Charlie Baker following him.
I don't think I want to plan that somebody in 30 years that we don't know is going to sit there and force us to do something. Therefore, we should do more than we automatically have to do.
No, what we do is we try to spend the bare minimum now, and then it costs us more later, but that doesn't factor in to what we do. I mean, I think the most of what we spend in the town in capital projects always garner more attention because they're big and they're shiny and there's a big number associated with them. And we're going to spend 20 times on operations over the next 30 years as we will spend on any of these capital projects. And so, I mean, the affordability of the town relates a lot more to what we pay for services, what the costs are, for the services that we have and that we're asking for,
I agree with all
than
that.
the capital spending that we have. And so that doesn't say one way or the other whether we are, but we can't ever make a decision, I don't think, on the assumption that the only costs we're looking to avoid are the short-term costs. I mean,
I agree with that, but I think we have to make decisions based on what we think we can afford. That's my biggest beef right now in the conversation so far is, as I said before, we go through and talk about the features we want. And whenever the question of affordability comes up, suddenly it's either, well, you're not being strategic, which I disagree with severely, or, well, we can justify it through something that's going to happen years down the road. I think affordability of this school is an issue, and I think we need to put a stake in the ground And I'm not saying we, I don't mean you, the three of us. I think we need to be sensitive to where the townspeople are on this. But any place else I've been, when you design something, you don't just kind of design it and then say, we'll send you the bill.
Yeah, but no one's done that, Gus. I think you're sort of conjuring a false, I mean, there's been a cost associated with, and I've been at all these meetings. Every single proposal we get, every single option we get has a cost associated with it.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to make a choice.
Right.
And not just between the features and not just between, we can always cut it way back, right? We can always spend less. And if that's the policy judgment that we want to spend less, then that's the policy judgment. But I think the idea that no one's considering cost is not true, right? I mean, because the cost is there, the numbers are there. And I will agree with you. We have not had debates about the cost of concrete or what we think the contractor is going to be, but every single option we've looked at has a price tag associated with it.
Like when you go to a car dealer and you see price tags, you don't sit there and negotiate over what was the cost of the tires in this price tag, but you walk into the dealer and say, which of these models can I afford? I'm not talking about cost in terms of the integrity of the cost buildup. I'm talking about cost in terms of affordability of cost. And that's got to do with when you walk into that car dealer, how much car can you afford to buy?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to show you a really expensive one that's really nice.
Right,
but I mean, that's actually the one that's right or not is a different question.
Right, but well, number one, this is not a car, and number two, I think if you want us to do that analysis, you should do that analysis. I mean, what do you think for the services that people get from the town government? What do you think is a reasonable amount for the people to pay for those services? And you start from there, and you can say, all right, here's what we think is a reasonable amount to pay for the suite of services that you provide in the town of Medfield, of which these services are provided in part by the buildings and the capital things that we use to support those services. That's the calculus. Like, what do you think it's worth? And then the second question is there just a limit on what we're going to charge? And we're only going to do so much as we can with that. I mean, that's really what's the value to the people in the town? What should be paid for that amount, right? Or are we just going to pick kind of a point of time in history? And again, I'm not saying this is wrong. We're going to say the socioeconomic makeup at the time in this year is the ideal socioeconomic makeup of the town of Medfield. And we are going to try to preserve that socioeconomic makeup. And for people with this average income, here's how much they reasonably can afford, assuming they're using assuming they're families that are sending their kids to the schools for some period of time, because that's the majority of people in town. And that's the other way to look at it. It's like, we want a family with this income to be able to afford to live here. Here's how much they're going to pay in average in federal taxes, state taxes. Here's how much they're going to pay for insurance and everything else. And here's the amount that that family can afford in Medfield. Because the other piece of this, the other strategic piece of this is also a zoning discussion. Because the much more so than taxes, one of the things that has made the town less and less affordable is every time, or many times, when houses turn over, they get torn down and replaced by a much bigger, more expensive house, of which the taxes are a trailing indicator of cost. It's the fact that you've gone from a 3-bedroom, 1,500 square foot ranch that's reasonably bought for 400,000 that's torn down, and now it's $1.2 million. And so I think it's a tax discussion, but it's also got to be a zoning discussion. And if we're going to try to set a socioeconomic level that we're looking to meet for the people in town, it's set at some point today or in the past, we have to look at that zoning piece as well. And that goes into the master planning, because that's going to drive the cost of living in this town much more so than the taxes. So,
well, I think the only thing I'd say in response to that is it's not just a question of little houses being knocked down and big houses and the tax on the big house is high. It's a matter of people who've been here for a long time who live in the same house that they've always lived in, where the taxes have gone up. Your point about socioeconomic decisions about where the town needs to be, I think that's a good one. So I kind of agree with that. I don't think you can only define it in terms of the average, although that's a key indicator. But I also think you have to define it in terms of the diversity of that. So it's not just what the average is. It's also a question, how well balanced are we around that average? And there's a lot of different dimensions to that kind of diversity. But the issue is, what does it take to keep this town being the kind of a town I think that probably is what attracted most of us to come here in the first place. And that's the thing I'm sensitive to. I know taxes go up, of course they do. And so, you know, it costs us $50-some million to put up the high school and the other schools. And that number didn't even last up 2 months when we were discussing 3 elementary school grades in this go round. So it's not an issue of, you know, let's get back to where we were in the 70s or something, but
I think if you want to know what you can afford, that's how you have to look at it, right? You have to look at it from the perspective of if you're trying to preserve a certain level of socioeconomic accessibility to the town for people who've been here. Because the reality is for our taxes, you know, if people, you have to live in this town a long time, assuming you've sent your kids to the schools, before you are a net contributor on the tax side. Because if you compare the cost of Medfield High School, you know, an average taxpayer paying $10,000 or $12,000 in taxes, what they would have to pay in tuition at an equivalently rated private high school for that period of time, you're much to the good. And so, you know, it's a balance of all of those things. I agree. But I do think if you want to know what we can't afford, it's not an arbitrary number. It's got to be tied to something. We're saying, okay, here's where we're trying to limit this. And then it's got to be a multi-pronged strategy. And again, I don't disagree with you, to make the town affordable and livable. And a lot of that, though, is preserving housing stock that's under, you know, under what is now $600,000 or $500,000. And then that stock has been gradually disappearing.
Well, and some parts of what you're talking about there, Mike, are not going to get resolved before a decision on a school is made. So you still have an affordability question around the school that we're going to have to figure that out in the absence of having sorted out strategies and all those dimensions you're talking about.
Right. But I think the affordability has to be tied to something other than just this number seems too high or it seems like a lot. I mean, the reality is over 20 years, for the most part, with a dip around the recession, construction cost inflation has been 4 to 6% a year. Now maybe we're going to do better if a lot of the construction that's been happening in the area, you know, tails off as a result of the pandemic and the recession, if people are moving stuff around. But that has been a pretty consistent phenomenon, particularly given how hot the market has been in Massachusetts, that those costs are going up pretty steady. And we were fortunate in the timing of the DPW and the public safety building, and fortunate because we had Bonifati and Quinn and all these other people who really know what they're doing managing those projects, that we got a really good deal on those buildings. You know, other towns paid more for the same kind of building. We can't, you know, control that. So I mean, just over 20 years, inflation alone, you know, those 3 buildings would not be $56 million today.
So what triggered this whole thing was simply one reaction to, and Pete, you've gotten different information that I've gotten, and I'm not trying to argue my information. I'm trying to argue the sensitivity of the issue, where with the Energy Committee's done tremendous work. And they are trying to do more tremendous work, and they have lots of things that they've already identified that will be of tremendous benefit to the town. So none of my comments here are a comment about the Energy Committee as an Energy Committee. It's a reaction to a recommendation, which, as I understand it, is likely to have a $3 to $5 million impact on the cost of the school. And that recommendation in the vacuum falls short for me because of that $3 to $5 million. My number may be too high. It may be that it's the most important thing we can do, and the building committee can find a way to build in that kind of a feature by cutting back on some other feature. So there's lots of different ways we might support that. And there might be ways to not support it with the net zero, recognizing that there are measures like net zero ready that don't require all the upfront costs. So I'm making the argument for being prudent in thinking about the total cost of the school and not being nonchalant when some idea comes in that could add $3 to $5 million to it, without really taking a look at how we don't just kind of add that on as just, well, that's another feature that somebody said they wanted. So
absolutely. And I think the issue is that the data is actually not complete at this point. And that's, as Board of Selectmen, what we want to get is we want to get that data as to what is the actual cost, so that I thought it was 1.7, you think it's up to 5. So that's a 3-fold increase. We need to get that number, and we need to find out how that relates to the operating cost savings if we build in greater energy efficiency, so that we can.
And then the only other question I think we have, Pete, based on your comment and mine, is that I don't know, and Mike, you're maybe the one that has the answer to this. I don't know whether it's the building committee that's going to go run off and do the economic analysis of net zero. Maybe it is, but I'm not sure that that's an automatic that the building committee is going to take.
My understanding is that they'll do that if we ask them to do it. And so that's what I'm suggesting, is that we should be asking them to give us those
So Mike,
answers.
so Mike, I'll take your guidance on what's reasonable and not reasonable by way of asking for that kind of a thorough business analysis from the building committee.
I don't see any reason why they can't. We meet tomorrow night, and I can raise this issue. And I'm sure Christine or Nick will remind me if I forget to do so. And then but I would still want their assumptions to be tested, at least sort of eyeballed by the energy committee, to say, yeah, this makes sense, that you're assuming this is what the utility costs would be otherwise. Here's what they will be in the net zero situation. And so we think that's a reasonable assessment of what the cost would be.
And I'm sure the energy committee would be very happy to try to analyze it once they get the data back, that way from Arrow Street or whoever it's going to be that does it. I would just go back to Gus. I think that we're all agreed that the taxes in town are exceedingly high. I mean, we're in the top 15 or 20 most taxed towns in the state. And that, although I think the reality is that when we make the decision on a new building like this, we tend to try to figure out what's the best building for the town rather than for the least amount of money. I mean, we're always trying to get for the least price we can, but we want a building that's going to actually function and serve the town. I think if you want to do an analysis of the affordability of the taxes, I think that you need to get more into what Mike was suggesting in terms of the operating costs of the town, that $70 million a year that it costs to run the town. And that then gets down to how many personnel do you have, because most of our budget is salaries. And so that if you really want to cut the budget of the town, you have to cut down the number of people that are working for the town.
Yeah, but 3/4 of that's the schools.
Yep.
So that gets a little dicey to go in that direction. Let me just share one thing about bigger picture of where I'm coming from. I arbitrarily, and I've done this in public meetings, so this isn't news. I arbitrarily said, look, I don't think our debt level for this school should take the town up above the level of an annual budget. Arbitrary, not based on any kind of rigorous analysis. I just stuck a stake in the ground and said, we're replacing a 2-grade school called Dale Street, and that's the mission. That was the purpose of this project. Now there's arguments, and actually philosophically, there are arguments I agree with about bringing more than just those 2 grades together. So from an intent standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint, I like where the schools are trying to go. But as a former project manager, I understand projects that get gold plated with added great ideas that lead to cost overruns. So there's a piece of me that says we were originally going to build a 2-grade school. Somebody had a great idea to go to a 3-grade school, and suddenly we've gone from a $35 to $50 million school to, I think the highest number I've seen so far is a $105 million school. That's classic gold plating. So that's kind of where my predisposition is coming from. But let's for a minute stop. And let's say in round numbers that whatever it is we do to finance this school, it gets us to a principal of $70 million, which is a lot of money. And that's adding the current debt on as well. Here's the issue. We also have an obligation or a plan to want to redevelop the state hospital property. And right now, I think one way or the other, that state hospital property represents a $25 million liability for us. Whether we pay to have buildings taken down, whether we pay for infrastructure or partially pay for infrastructure, I think that's where it's at least the right order of magnitude, right ballpark. So that's one thing that's on my mind. And the second thing that's on my mind is a park and rec facility. So when you sit there and say, well, gee, the total capacity the town has for this school is $100 million. The decision we're making there is that we are not going to redevelop the state hospital property unless we find some really magical way to do it at no cost to the town. And we're not going to develop a Parks and Rec facility, at least for another decade. And so when we make these decisions that are in our group, I think we need to be mindful. I may not have this right. You may disagree, or you may even think that those things are not important and the school is the most important thing, and we can have those discussions. But the way I'm looking at it is not just this school and what we can finance for it. It's actually what are the implications of the money we put into the school on the other things that we need, or we at least I think are looking at trying to invest in over the next 10 to 20 years, not 20 years, 10 years. That's the thing that alarms me. I see this could potentially be something that just pushes all other major investments off for at least a decade.
So I agree with you in concept, Gus, that we have to consider those other things. I mean, I don't agree that there's any, you acknowledge it's arbitrary. And so I don't agree that there's any real meaning between the connection.
Arbitrary is not the same as invalid.
I'm not saying invalid, but I'm saying it's not tied to any of the economics. They're saying, look, you shouldn't have a mortgage on your house higher than your annual salary. Somebody could do it that way. Somebody could not do it that way. It's just one way to look at it, right? And there's nothing, I'm not saying it's invalid, but it doesn't actually represent what's affordable or not affordable to the taxpayers of Medfield. It doesn't necessarily reflect what is responsible or irresponsible. It's a marker in the ground, and that's fine. From a strategic planning perspective, I think it's, I mean, you can vote your view however it is. I think from a policy standpoint, I mean, that's a policy question. And it's a policy question that if that was going to be the policy of the town, that we were not going to borrow more than the annual operating budget of the town, then that's a policy that should have been set a long time ago, right?
I'm not positioning it as a policy question. I'm positioning it as a way to think about this strategically.
Right. And I'm just saying, I don't think it is, right? I mean, I think it's a marker, but I don't know that it's the most relevant marker. I mean, I think it's, you have to look at the total tax base. You have to look at the total borrowing base. I think you do have to look at what else you're going to spend the money on. And that's why kind of through this process, I have been very focused on not just what is the cost of the school, but what are the knock-on consequences of one decision or the other, right? And when the obvious knock-on consequence of staying with a 2-grade school is we are committing to the current configuration for the next 100 years. We've just decided with this decision, there's going to be 3 elementary schools in Medfield, barring even greater demographic collapse than we're currently undergoing. There's just going to be 3 elementary schools in Medfield, period. We're going to have 3 principals, 3 grades. That's what it's going to be. We won't have any other choices or options, because once you've built that as 2, the next school you're going to do is in 20 years. And, even if you did a 3-grader in 20 years, you're still going to have 3, right? Because the transition.
But the opposite is true too, Mike. If you do this, then you'll have 2 schools for the next 100 years.
No, not necessarily, right? It depends on enrollment. I mean, it depends on what the enrollment is. I mean, it depends on how many kids are in the school system, right? So if you build a 3-grade school and the enrollment stays as it is now, right, at least from a capacity standpoint, that could be a 4-grade school, right? And you could just close one of the other elementary schools. And you'd be like a lot of towns that have kind of a closed elementary school. A lot of towns have them as the enrollment fluctuates and you have some swing space. Or maybe, frankly, if you did that, right, if the current enrollment stayed the same and you shifted the grades around, maybe Wheelock becomes the park and recreation building and you don't build a park and recreation building, right? So it's not just the what are we crowding out by borrowing this amount of money? It's also, what are we committing ourselves to? What options are we taking away? And I don't think either one is dispositive. I think this is one of these situations where everyone's looking for a magic bullet where we can say, well, the evidence is on this side and the science is on this side and the science is settled and this is done. And the reality is this is going to require the exercise of good old fashioned prudential judgment about taking all these factors together, because I don't think if we stay with the current grade configuration, I don't think the school system is going to be producing full-on ignoramuses in 12 years. If we shift to 3 to 5, I don't think we're suddenly going to have 75 Nobel Prize winners. I mean, I think there are differences. I think there's good arguments for one over the other, but I think both choices we make do restrict what we do in the future. And so I'm focused not only on that, but also on what level of flexibility we have in the building, right? So if we were to build essentially a replica of Dale Street, right? The exact same thing for the exact same number of kids, and that layout. And then if we did have an enrollment increase of some kind, whether it's as high as the state is projecting, which, as you all know, I'm skeptical of, whether it's in between, whether it fluctuates, we'll just have a lot less flexibility. Whereas if we have a little bit of play in the joints, since we don't control school enrollment, and even something like the hospital is not going to have a big directional impact on enrollment one way or the other, because it's, it's less than 10% of the town, even at the maximum size. And the mix of units is not going to be the kind of units that generally generate a lot of kids. How much flexibility do we want to have, right? When you think of an enrollment projection as a matter of probability, within that range of probability, what costs us more or less, right? What are the costs of being wrong? Right. I mean, in my view is sort of if you're wrong on the high side, well, then you have flexibility to consolidate, which would have benefits and have upsides and downsides, and everything has upsides and downsides, and but you'd have some flexibility there. Whereas if you build it kind of right to on the assumption that our current enrollment, which is remarkably smooth, if you look at the enrollment in our schools right now, and I haven't done the analysis, the statistical analysis, but the variation within class sizes is, I think, the lowest it's been in the period of time the state tracks. So you look at I think our biggest class right now is 206 kids. Our smallest is 186. If you look back at 2002, 2003, there are classes that are 100 kids more than other classes. I think the senior class that year was like 154, and the first grade class was like 262 or something, right? It's just huge, which makes it much harder to manage. So if you're assuming kind of this steady enrollment like we have, and you're building to that, you're going to, you're not going to be protected against some of that variation, right? You're going to have some less optionality. Again, that doesn't necessarily go one way or the other, but I think that's also, we got to think about that too.
Well, we had this conversation like 2 meetings ago. The one thing I took away from that one was that when you talk flexibility, flexibility doesn't automatically require you to build the building that you think you might need at the full build out. Flexibility can be designing a building deliberately designed to be prepared for an addition to be put on it at the point in time the demand proves itself out. I was struck by the rules for the MSBA reimbursement. You actually get better reimbursement if you take a building and then modify it and expand it. It's actually, presumably because they assume it would be a smaller project, I know, but the reimbursement rate actually right now is better if you do that than if you build new. Now, I think most time you never want to build new, but in this case, with this discussion about a projection of growth as significant as what the projections are, with the skepticism that goes with it, it would make sense to me that we would build a building which meets our near-term needs in order to keep the cost of the immediate acquisition down, but basically specify the expectation to the designer that we want you to build a building that's set up so that we could build the rest of the building out if the demand proved true.
Right.
And we take care of that.
That's kind of unidirectional flexibility, right? And I think about it like, again, I've said this a lot of times, like I think going to 2 elementary schools can have a lot of financial benefits to the town operationally as well, just in administrative savings and the like. And so if I'm right about what I think is going to happen with enrollment, then you'll be able to fit more grades in those schools. In other words, you'd be able to go then from 3 to 2. But also then have the flexibility that if you do get even if you just get a surge, right, you might just there's no guarantee you're going to get an influx for 12 years, but even if you have a surge, that creates problems, right? If you have a couple of big years in a row, as that kind of, you sort of move through the snake, it creates problems, whereas at least in the elementary level, this would give us flexibility in that direction as well. So I see your point entirely about the ability to add on. My presumption is always, there's just some costs to putting a shovel in the ground. And so the fewer total projects you have, on balance, you're probably better. But I'm sure there's some point at which the projects can get so high that that's not true. I just think, 2 is always going to be more than 1, even for the same amount of space.
I mean, going back to your analogy about buying a house, people sometimes buy the house that they can afford now, and then they add on to it 20 years from now when they're in a better position to do it. So, okay, we've covered the ground here tonight. I think we're not, and this isn't the building code committee meeting anyway. So
This is Pete Peterson's Selectmen report that we're on right now.
Yeah. I was going to compliment Pete before the warrant committee about what a stellar, superior job he was doing to the previous chair at being able to work all the way through the agenda. Like it was 7:15 and we were looking for, it's like, when's the warrant committee getting here? And somebody got in your way, Pete, and stopped you from that nice, efficient, short meeting that I just knew we were going to have tonight.
Well, that'll be a lesson to you, Pete. No more Selectmen reports from you. If you get through the two of us, I've got nothing to report. I refer people to my blog and I'll move on.
You're right. It was Pete. You instigated. I didn't think about that. You instigated this. It's not really my fault. Okay.
Right. It's like the line from Animal House. You trusted us, right?
So the other thing that I wanted to let people know about was I did go to the Memorial Day bell ringing up at the hospital yesterday, and it was a nice event, nice moving event. And we've got a nice 1896 bell cast in, where did John tell me it was cast? Down in Rhode Island somewhere maybe, or Connecticut. And they built it into the tower so you can never get it out. It won't come out. It's there for the duration. And I guess, and St. Edward's has the similar bell, but apparently they sold theirs or something when they moved.
I heard the bell, Pete, and I was surprised because I'm just over on Harding Street. It's not that far away, but actually it was a very faint bell from, we're relatively close, but.
So, all right, I'll fess up then. We were a little late and we were walking up the driveway and it was very faint in the main driveway. And it wasn't until you got to the building when it was really distinct.
Yeah.
But I think it carries in different directions, different loudnesses. Because down by the river, it's pretty loud.
Just to let you know, there were a significant number of public comments that came in during that discussion under Selectmen's reports. So if you want to review
how do I get out of this meeting? How do I shut this off? Where's the leave meeting button?
if you want, I can forward them all to you. But Gus, you may want to call Leo. Bram, it looks like you would like to.
Actually, now I've got them up on the screen there. I'll have to go back through. I wasn't paying attention to that. I was totally absorbed with my conversation with Mike.
So if you just want to review those before the meeting.
I think if I have them all, when you close, then I think I lose them though, right?
You lose them, yeah.
All right, yeah, send them to me. That's okay. And appreciate the comments that were directed at me, which most of them seem to have my name in there.
I'll send them along.
Okay, thanks, Christine. And thanks, Leo, and whoever else is there.
There is a comment that just came in from Chris Potts that she noted for tonight's minutes that the proponents of the citizens petition never heard from the warrant committee about its objections or were given an opportunity to discuss it with the committee. Tonight was the first time hearing virtually all of them. They've been in touch with the chair. So, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Chris, Nick, Mike, Gus, anything else for tonight?
I will move adjournment.
No.
Is there a second to the adjournment?
Oh, second. I missed the move.
Yeah.
Second.
Mr. Murphy.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yes.
And Mr. Marcucci, aye.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for tuning in.